And it's like sitting down with family. It's like sitting down with your brother and your dad and your mom and, sit with relatives. That's how they make me feel. And I love it. I love every single minute of it. I'm so comfortable with Arn at this point.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Fresh, and stand back for another video. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Paul BromWell from Ad Free Shows. So, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Tom. I've been looking forward to this since you asked me, and I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
So, if we take this back, my friend, to the very beginning, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
Wow. Well, it's a long, long time ago. Tom, I'm old. Okay. I'm really old. And we're going back to the early 80s, right? So it started with my grandfather. He was a big wrestling fan, the era of Bruno Sammartino, Ivan Koloff, Pedro Morales, Bobo Brazil. And he used to take my dad to wrestling. He lived in the northeastern part of the U.S. So they would go see shows in Baltimore at the Baltimore Arena, and took my dad as a young child, and so it was a family thing. So after I was born very late 70s, and
Mm.
as a young child in the early 80s, dad and my pop-up would watch wrestling, and I'd watch wrestling with him. And my first memories were Bob Backlund and the neck and shoulder with the Iron Sheik losing the title to the Iron Sheik, and then Iron Sheik losing the title to Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania being born. And that's my first memories of wrestling.
That's very, very cool. So, you talked about your dad and your grandfather being the ones that got you into wrestling and it almost being a family tradition. So, was it something there where you got to a certain age and they were like, "You're old enough now, we want to show you this"? Or were they watching, you was like, "This is cool, I want to watch this"?
Yeah, I just remember them talking about it and watching it. I don't remember it being a certain age. Remember, this is way before the Attitude Era and all that good stuff, where you were like, should I let my children watch this or not? And it was more, hey, and it was presented to me like, man, it was never, the kayfabe side of it. I thought everything was real and it was really
Mm.
cool. And the spectacle was awesome. So I just can recall being allowed to watch it from the get-go as a young child, and picking up with those storylines, which is cool because I got into it right before the boom of, like I said, Hulkamania, WrestleMania, and all that good stuff.
So, you talked about there getting in it before the quote unquote 80s boom period of Hulkamania. So, do you have any memories of like wrestling pre Hulk Hogan? And you was like, would wrestling work without Hulk Hogan? Do you think?
Uh, I don't think so, because if you look at it now, I mean, I'm sure Vince would come up with something, right? Knowing what we know about Vince at this point, a character or something, but he was perfect for the 80s genre. Larger than life, 6'6", whatever, tan, long blonde hair, the rock and roll era. He encapsulated all of that. That was his persona. The what you gonna, the whole big, that was 80s to a T. So would he have captured that outside of it? Sure. Look what he did with Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man, and all those other, but he was such a pivotal character. And, Vince obviously saw it and said, this is who I want to build my company around. We can armchair quarterback it and say, would it have been
Mm.
as big? I don't know. But man, he was right time, right place, perfect, and exactly what I'm a big fan of the 80s in general, the genre, the music, the movies. And then when they ever do those 80s retro pieces now, they can't help but do it, but show Hulk Hogan highlights in some form or fashion, or WWF highlights, and he's always involved in them. He was on Sports Illustrated. So yeah, it was just such a great the timing, again, right place, right time for all of it to explode.
You talk about there being a big 80s fan and obviously being a big Hulk Hogan fan. How does your fandom of Hulk Hogan change when we find out what we find out about him, if you know what I mean?
Oh
Are
yeah.
you someone that can separate the art from the person, or did that change your fandom of him at all?
Yeah, no, obviously disappointed. I think too, for me, Tom, it's one of those things that you've learned in life. You put people on a pedestal and you realize that as you get older, whether it's wrestling, sports, your own family, friends, that's a lot of the people that you look up to or put on a pedestal, they end up being human. And not only, and I'm not using that as an excuse at all, but they're not um, perfect. They make mistakes. They do things and say things that disappoint you.
Mm.
And that is so unfortunate for so many people that we've put on pedestals in our life. So to me, it was just another example, if you will, of someone that, you know, said their prayers, ate their vitamins, did all the right things in that character. And then it's like, ah, here we go, you know, just someone else that has you know, unfortunately been a disappointment. But when is all is said and done, does that prevent me from looking back on 1987 Hogan Andre, or 85 the tag team match with Piper against, you know, with Mr. T and Mr. Wonderful and Roddy? No, I still look back on it because I was a great fan of that time. Those were the
Mm.
days that I was, you know, I look back on as just a fun time of my life as a child and growing up. So I can still appreciate all of that, but at the end of the day, you know, doesn't mean he's still an American hero as far as just the person behind the character. So, you know, it's just kind of having that type of balanced view of people just in general throughout life.
Very, very cool and very well put, I might add. So, when it comes to Hulk Hogan and your fandom in wrestling, when he departs WWF in, I believe, 93, the wrestling historians are going to kill me because I probably got that wrong. When he departs in 93, do you follow him to WCW? Or are you someone that's like, I'm going to stick with WWF because I enjoy their product?
I was just a WF only guy, right? At that young age, my dad was watching a lot of NWA Jim Crockett promotions as well, too. Being in the Northeast, we got Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, whether it was from Philadelphia, Baltimore, Virginia. So I was also able to check out that wrestling show as
Mm.
well. So I liked Ric Flair, the Four Horsemen, Arn Anderson. To me, that kind of elevated my wrestling fandom because there was a deeper level of reality. It was a little bit more brutal, the cage matches, the blood, all those things. And I really got caught up in that. So my fandom wasn't an exclusive fandom, which I think you see a lot of today,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whether you're on social media. It's an exclusive brand fandom. I've always been the believer of, hey, I want everybody to be successful because I know, having what we lived through the Attitude Era and NWO era, it made all wrestling better, right? So to answer your question, did I follow Hulk over to WCW? I was already watching NWA
Oh,
and
okay.
WCW. So I kind of saw him. Okay, he left. He's doing movies, he's doing his thing. And then when WCW brought him in, he had changed a lot, his popularity, and I was getting older too. I was starting to enter my teenage years. So my child looking at wrestling for childlike eyes was already starting to transition. Now I'm a teenager. I'm starting to understand that this stuff is obviously a little bit more scripted and stuff. I am enjoying it. I think it's cool that Hulk's there. It's not the same 80s Hulk. He looks completely different. But he's still popular. Is he popular like he was when I was watching in the 80s with him and Macho and stuff? No. But that's why I thought it was so cool what Eric Bischoff did with him and the transition to the bad guy.
Mm. So you talk about the transition to the bad guy there and the NWO. So when he does turn heel to form the NWO and stuff, is that the moment? Do you sort of are you in favor of the heel turn?
Oh
Does
yeah.
that enhance your fandom? Things like that.
I'm wearing my ad-free shows NWO
That
flavored
is a
style
very cool
t-shirt, as you
T-shirt,
can
by the
see
way.
there, right? As a supporter of ad-free. But hey, listen, I was in, right? So I was at the Great American Bash in Baltimore
Oh, you were
when
there?
Nash and Hall power bombed Eric Bischoff through the stage. You remember that
Ooh,
moment? That
yeah.
was also the match where Kevin Sullivan, who I've been able to do some Taskmaster with Kevin Sullivan recordings lately, where he and Benoit fought up through the crowd and into the bathroom, and they were all over the place, and they kind of wrestled right past me. You wouldn't even recognize me in the crowd at this point. So different. But yeah, so I was all in. I was going to every show I could, whether it was Philly, Baltimore. I was all in on that phase of Hulkamania, if you will, and the black and the white. And
Mm.
man, I was at an age too where I could start going on my own. I didn't need dad and mom to pay for me and travel with me. It was going with buddies at this point. So big time fan of that. But I also was paying attention to WWE. Again, I was a fan of wrestling in
I was
general.
so happy you brought that up. That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So you talked about there paying attention to both products, like, but WCW at this point is more adult. and the WWF is maybe more because this is sort of new generation, if I've got my
Yes.
periods correct. So, what was it you maybe still liked about the new generation era that you're like, okay, I can appreciate WCW, but I also still like this stuff?
I was not, I knew what was going on, but to say that I was a hardcore fan of what WWF was doing, by no stretch of the imagination. It would be, hey, keeping up with it. Let's go maybe here and there, but it wasn't like, hey, I got to watch every show that comes out all the time. But I just knew enough to be dangerous to kind of know what the main program was. It was losing my attention, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. What about when the
Yeah.
Attitude Era kicks in? Does it regain your attention at this point?
Yeah, back in, because I'm also watching ECW at this point, being not far from Philadelphia. So I'm able to go to some of those shows. I'm all in on the hardcore stuff. I'm loving, the music and every that Attitude Era infusion that ECW brought along. And then to see it, you can see that it's starting to permeate the WWE and in some cases the WCW. We want more realism. We want more edginess. We want more of that violence in our product. And to see how ECW almost stimulated was the stimulant to that growth in both promotions was cool to be a part of it as a fan.
You brought up there ECW sort of almost stimulating both products. So I am very curious to know, like, as someone that was an ECW fan, if Paul Heyman could have got the money together and stuff,
Mm.
do you think ECW would still be, not, maybe not around today, but do you think ECW would have gone a bit longer and things
Oh
like that?
yeah. Oh, definitely gone longer if it had the money and the resources and the finance. Anytime that I think they had such a cult following. When you watch your product as a fan at home and you see a rabid fan base that is just in love with the product, there's a huge win already for the person at home watching it, because now
Mhm.
I want to feel invested. Why? The crowd's invested, and it's like making it exciting for me to watch it. So I'm already halfway already in without even watching the wrestling. Then you go to Paul Heyman's storyline creativity, and he would have been able, if he had the money, to probably bring in even more talent to what he was doing too. You have to think of it that way. So I definitely would have think that if he would have been funded correctly, had the right resources, they could have been a player for much longer time.
Something that has been my voice is going, I do apologize, guys. Something that you brought up within this conversation is your fandom is predicated, it sounds like, on the competition of wrestling. So in 2001, when WWF does go by, like, sorry, when ECW goes away, ECW
Yeah.
and WCW go away, how does that change your fandom when WWE or WWF is the only game in town?
Yeah, so there was an early time there in the 2000s where, and also I was going through my own life change. I was in 2001, I got married. And so things in my own life were changing, and I kind of fell out of watching wrestling in the early 2000s. And it's not lost on me either. That's also when competition kind of dried up, right?
Yeah,
ECW, WCW, all now merging in with the WWE, and I stopped paying attention as much. There were probably a 2 or 3 year span from about 2001 to 2003 or four where I was not really paying attention to wrestling. And then, again, would hear things here and there. And then around '04, probably '04, I jumped back in with the WWE. But still, as cool as WWE was, I love the rated R superstar. I loved Randy Orton, and obviously I had missed kind of the Brock Lesnar piece. Kurt Angle was starting to wrap up his WWE career and start to shift over to TNA. There's nothing like when competition is happening in wrestling. That's
yeah.
when it's at its best.
So you brought up there that you had a gap sort of between 2001, 2002, sort of 2004. So what is something you've mentioned Brock Lesnar there? What is something that maybe you've gone back on the network and watched and you're like, oh, I wish I was a fan during this point? And then what is something that you're like, yeah, I can see why I wasn't a fan during this point?
For me, it's interesting, especially now that I worked podcasting with Kurt Angle. Those were his hot years, rookie year, and some of his best years with the WWE at the time was through that era. So when I go back and we're recording some events through his early 2000s WWE run, I'm now being myself reintroduced to that era of
Mm.
wrestling, watching clips with him, and like, my God, I sit and think to myself, look at all the stuff I missed while I wasn't watching wrestling, matches with him and Rey Mysterio or whatever the case may be. So I'm also with Kurt as he's reliving his career. I'm like getting to watch some of the stuff for the first time.
Does that help you as a co-host to not know what's coming in certain things if you've
I,
got that gap
I
in your
think
knowledge?
so because it's yeah, I think so because I do have we have research and notes and things that we can go off of and Kurt's, but for me now I get to host it where I'm watching it with fresh eyes in some respects. Now, if you were to ask others who said, no, I think it's better if you did watch it then. True, okay, there could be your perspective as what you remember as a fan. But for me, I have a little bit more of appreciation, I feel like, because I never got to see it the first time around. So now
Mm.
I'm getting to see it and I'm like maybe a little bit more excited, like, holy shit, you guys tore it down. That was incredible. I mean, this is really cool being able to go through your career with you right now and see some of this stuff. So that's how I look at it.
That's very, very cool. So you brought up Kurt Angle there, and you brought up ad-free shows a couple of times. How do you join the ad-free shows crew with Conrad Thompson, and how do you connect and start podcasting with Kurt Angle?
Yeah, no, I'll try to keep it cliff notes so that we're not here all day, but it started a few years ago. I was a huge fan of What Happened When with Tony Schiavone and Conrad. And I was listening to Conrad, Something to Wrestle With, all those shows. But the What Happened When crew with Tony kind of had a community feel to it. And they were the first Patreon that had kind of that communal feel. They had a tier called Loki Big Hogs. They still do. And I signed up for that. Long story short, I ended up going on a trip down to Huntsville, Alabama. And that's where I met Conrad and I met Tony. And we had a nice weekend down there. And I got to travel around a little bit with Conrad while we were down there. And we got to know each other on a more personal level. I got to ask him questions. He was showing where he grew up. And just having met some friends down there, after we got back from that trip, I started talking to him about podcasting, and it's something that I'd never done before. And we kind of came up with an idea or concept to try to start our own podcast and put a little different spin on it. And that's where we came up with a podcast called Save by the Pod. And
Mm.
I mentioned I'm a big fan of the 80s nostalgia, movies, music, and same thing with 80s, 90s. And so we'd put a little spin on wrestling. We picked one event from like the case. We'd get down at the end of the show, but prior to that, we talk about what was the number one movie that month, what was the number one hit single of the month, some of the songs, what were we watching on TV, and it would be more of a nostalgia show, and then wrapped in wrestling.
Mm.
And but that's where I really was self-taught on a lot. I cut my teeth on the on that podcast. Um, I learned what microphone to buy, how to use Adobe Audition, Roadcaster, this, that, how to upload a podcast, all the stuff that all of you do to create content now, just like you do.
Mm.
I really cut my teeth on that show, and a couple of the listeners of the show were really close friends with Conrad, and that show kind of morphed and grew, and we were getting a lot of listeners every week. And one day, Conrad reached, "Hey, when you golf over there on these podcasts, I've heard a lot of good things about you. I'm looking for shows community, and I could use your help, and I would love to use you." Long story short, I went to Huntsville again, hung out with him for a weekend. I spent the entire weekend with me. He kind of sat me in his office, showed me his vision for ad-free shows, and said, "I'll have you be a part of it in some respects." And I had like one of the best weekends ever with him, really getting to know him and Megan, his wife, and just so enjoyable. And I left there, and the rest is history.
So something you brought up there, which I find very interesting, is the fact that you were pretty much self-taught with Saved by the Pod when it comes to content creating. So what are some early lessons that you learned doing Saved by the Pod that you now use in your work? And what were some, I hate using the word mistakes, but you know what I mean?
Oh
Some
yeah.
things that
Oh
maybe
yeah.
you did early on that you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do this in future podcasts.
I thought that some of the stuff I learned, so we were very scripted and it was word for word, everything was written out. I was always very wanted to be prepared, which I think is a good thing. But sometimes I felt like I was so over prepared and so by the book that I would oftentimes forget just to have fun and be myself and let my personality come out. Um, Also, when I would start with Conrad and work on some of the shows, he would say, "All right, I need you to sit in for Bruce Pritchard. I need you to sit in for this show and tag me in here and there." And I mean, listen, the first time I ever did Bruce Pritchard show, I was on vacation and had brought some stuff and was in a walk-in closet with some equipment I hurry up and pulled together. And the audio turned out really bad. I have spent hours editing. I was getting text messages. They need the show right away. It was very stressful. And I was doing everything I could to survive. And I wasn't myself. I was just trying to get through it. And so I think a lot of the shows, whether it's been helping out or filling in for Jim Ross or Eric Bischoff or stuff, it's just been having to work through some of the culture shock of who the legends are that I'm working with and being comfortable and being myself. And, there is a thing called chemistry, and it develops over time as you work with someone.
Mm,
And when you're just one guy coming in and Conrad freaking Thompson, and that these podcasts are listened to thousands and thousands of people, there's pressure that comes along with that. And anybody that says there's not, they're full of shit. But there is, and that people are expecting you to deliver, and if you don't, you're going to be roasted on social media. That's going to come with it, no matter what. And so I think for me, I was very tense, and that would get in my head a little bit. So for me, I think it was just learning to be yourself, not worry about what the naysayers may say, but really focus on more of a chemistry
mm,
with the in the podcast.
mm. Something you brought up there was being starstruck by the legends that you got to work with. Who is the one that you were like, holy shit, I get to be on this
Sure.
show this week?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Bruce Pritchard. I mean, something to wrestle with has won, sports podcast of the year 2 years in a row. That has the largest audience. So when you do that and you're, several states away, like I said, in a walk-in closet with not even your home setup, it was just I was set up for failure, I thought. But we made it through. I probably lost 10 pounds of sweat through that show.
Mm,
But that's a holy shit moment. But then, every time I do this, he'll get more comfortable with me and hopefully I'll get more comfortable with him. Then you can let your personality out. He understands if you're joking or not. Sometimes it's hard because Bruce and I were audio only. You can't even see each other if you're making faces, if you're how you're trying to say things. So it's and you want to deliver the best, right? You want people to be happy. You don't want people to walk away saying that absolutely sucked.
mm.
So Bruce Pritchard for sure.
What has been you talked about that absolutely sucked. What has been a show, what has been a show that you're like, I thought that sucked, but then have you had one where Conrad's been like, we've had great feedback on this show, I
Yeah.
really enjoy, people have really enjoyed this episode. Have you had one like that?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to that Bruce Pritchard first show that I did where I hated some of the audio. There was some criticism I knew for the audio quality, which I knew was going to happen because of what I was trying to do on the road with it. But I thought, oh my God. But Bruce made it fun because he called me by a different first name every time he interacted with me. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a whole skit. Okay, Dave. Okay, Juan. Okay, George. Okay, every time he said something to me, it was never Paul. It was some random name. So he made fun of me, which was totally fine. I was for it, to just kind of loosen me up. But also, I still have people be like, "Man, I want you to come back on," and they'll call me the names that Bruce was calling me from that show originally. So it obviously stuck out in people's mind, thanks to Bruce and his creative genius. But man, I was sweating Crisco that entire show. So, did I feel like it was shitty? Sure. But did Bruce make, lemonade out of lemons? He tried his best.
That's very, very cool, my friend. Something else I wanted to bring up is learning from Conrad Thompson. He's one of the best podcasters out there, in my opinion. So, what is something that maybe you learned from him when it comes to podcasting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's probably one thing, like, I for a while there, it was like, hey, I'm tagging in Bromwell. I'm going to tag in Bromwell. One of the things that I wish, looking back on all of what I do, I've now taken over Kurt and Arn. Yeah, I don't get a lot of time with Conrad, right? And that's fine. The man is extremely busy. I look at him as a mentor in many ways, but it's more of a mentor from afar because usually the text messages are, hey, I need you to do this. Hey, can you jump in on this one? Hey, I can't make it there. And then every once in a while, hey, how are things going? And I'm telling them, things are going fine. And so part of it has been, there's sometimes I look back and be like, man, I just wish that we could have evolved and gone a layer deep in just our friendship and mentorship relationship. But the man has so many things going on with not just wrestling podcasts, but having a family and the mortgage side of the business,
Mm,
Starcast, you name it. But as far as just learning from him, it was how easy he's able to kind of make these podcasts feel like conversations and less like interviews. And I think for me, that has always been where I've tried to get better is we have a lot of material to cover. And Kurt and Arn Anderson, two podcasts that I do, they both like to be done in 60 minutes. They both like to be done in an hour. That's the time frame they have set aside each week. So whatever topic we're covering, the pressure is on for me to try to facilitate that podcast interview and get everything out of it, including fan questions and sponsors within 1 hour's time, because I know that's what they have. So it's how can I make it so conversational and relaxed and fun, my personality, with them in order to do that. And that's, some of what I've learned from Conrad. When he does WHW with Tony, half the show is not necessarily wrestling. It's them bullshitting and having a good time with each other. But you can't help but
mm.
fall in love with it because it's like, man, this is an hour and a half of my life on the road to work back and forth that I can just enjoy and laugh my ass off. And you want others to feel like I'm going to learn a little bit more about Kurt Angle and talk about his history. But at the same time, I'm also going to have fun with Paul and Kurt and their relationship and laugh and maybe learn some things about Kurt Angle that I had no idea about.
That's very, very cool. You may have mentioned this, but my memory sucks. I do apologize. How did you first connect with Kurt and start
Sure.
podcasting with, start bringing his podcast onto ad free shows?
Yeah, Kurt was very regimented as far as the date and time that he needed to record every week. It used to be always Fridays at 1 o'clock. It was his podcast time. I mean, he's still going to many appearances, still doing a lot of different things in his schedule. Well, Conrad also has a tight schedule, right? So he wasn't always able to make that 1 o'clock on Friday deal. And so it just became one of those things where, hey, Paulie, I need you to tag in. Paul, I need you to tag in and take with Kurt. Well, through some of those, me filling in, Kurt and I started to develop a chemistry. We started to get to know each other. We're both from Pennsylvania. We're both Pittsburgh sports fans. We started to get each other's personality as far as just giving each other a hard time, busting balls. I started to realize I could get away with, taking jabs and poking fun at him, and then he would do it back to me. Again, we became friends. He came out for a signing here in Philadelphia. I drove out and spent a little bit of time with him. So through that, I think Conrad obviously knew we were getting closer and said, hey, look, it makes sense. Let's just, instead of going halfway on this, I'm busy as all get out. I'm taking on, Mick Foley soon. I'm taking on, other types of things, other projects for ad-free shows. Kurt, how do you feel about Paul becoming your full-time host? Kurt was 100% all in because we had become, really cool at the point that happened. And I think it became official. Already doing a lot of shows, but it became official November last year where I took over Kurt and Arn. Same thing with Arn. I started filling in a
Mm.
lot with Arn here and there. Well, Arn and I started developing a chemistry. And so Conrad had the same conversation with both of us. And Conrad's like, hey, these are two shows that I feel like you've developed a great chemistry with both these guys. Again, because of my schedule, and both these guys have said they'd love to have you. Let's just go ahead and make it happen.
That's very, very cool. Something you brought up earlier in this conversation was the fact that weren't, you missed out on Kurt Angle's entire run uh,
Mm.
when you first, when you was watching wrestling originally. And how big of a fan of Arn were you before you started podcasting with him out of interest?
Arn Anderson.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That was major because again, in the late 80s, I was watching Jim Crockett Promotions and NWA. So now I knew the Four Horsemen. I watched Arn and Ole. I watched Arn and Tully. I knew Arn and Tully in WWF. He's the one who I really followed his career. Obviously, in the early 2000s, he's not wrestling anymore, but his career, Arn's career, I watched all of it from the Horseman stuff to the My Spot, everything, the promos. Um, Man, when I got to work with Arn, that was also a little intimidating, but he was so gracious. His
Mm.
wife and family have never been, they are like the sweetest Southern people. I got to meet his wife and Brock. I had dinner with Brock and Arn uh 6 months ago, and it's like sitting down with family. It's like sitting down with your brother and your dad and your mom, and sit with relatives. That's how they make me feel. And I love it. I love every single minute of it. I'm so comfortable with Arn at this point.
That's very, very cool. Sort of the opposite of never meet your heroes. Sort of sometimes it's cool to meet your heroes by the
Kurt
sounds
was
of it.
same thing with Kurt and Arn both. Kurt is has been nothing but so kind and gracious. I hear from his wife. Giovanna calls me a lot too, and she's wild. She's funny, but all great people. I've gotten to know a lot of people through this. I just got a text from Jeff Jarrett last weekend because I didn't go to Starcast, and he said Karen and I and Cody miss you out here. I've gotten to do his show when he was Conrad had to take a little bit of a break during last year's Ric Flair last match. And that's
Mm.
where I got to know Karen, and I got to do a couple shows with her for ad-free shows behind the paywall. Man, it's been so cool to meet all these great people that you've watched on TV for all these years.
That's very, very cool, my friend. Something you brought up earlier was social media, and with getting to meet your heroes and people that other people might consider heroes, do you ever get like backlash of people being like, "Why do you get to do this podcast, etc.?" And how do you handle that sort?
I'll be honest with you. There was a time where I jumped off Twitter for a while. And it was when my mom passed. It was a
I'm
year
sorry.
ago, and that's okay. It'll actually be 2 years ago this January.
Oh
But I
wow.
just I jumped off Twitter, and there was multiple reasons of that. It was because of that. It was because I just wanted to shut down the noise. And it wasn't because of necessarily all backlash, because what you don't see is you're more likely to get backlash publicly and praise privately, if
Mm.
that makes sense. Usually at work, or if you go to work, they're like always praise in public and work with somebody on their opportunities in private. Well, it's different. When you're in the public eye, you get trashed publicly, and then you get praised privately. It's
I'm
right. So
so
it's the
sorry.
direct That's all right. It's the direct opposite of how our world works, which is good. But you know what? There was a period of time where I had to be calloused, and sometimes I'd send screenshots to Conrad, and Conrad would be like, "Buddy, you're my. I don't care what they say. You're my guy. You're gonna do. This is what we're doing." And a lot of the backlash wasn't Paul sucks. It was where's Conrad? That was more of
Ah,
the backlash. Where is Conrad? And so I didn't necessarily, but again, here's the other thing too, where I've never, and this is probably where I'm a lot different than a lot of your other podcasters. I'm probably not the best when it comes to self promotion, as far as I'm not very active on Twitter or come see me. Here's my graphic with this guy.
mm.
You're going to hear the best podcast we've ever done tomorrow. I am awful when it comes to wanting to do that stuff. Um, it's just not how I'm wired. It's not how I think. I feel like if my work and our work is good, others will recognize it. It doesn't have to come from me doing it. But I know that if you're going to get ahead in content creation, you have to be one of your strongest, loudest voices. And I'll admit to you, I'm not good at that, and that's probably hindered me in a lot of ways in this industry.
What about helping you though? Is staying off social media, has that helped? Like
It helps your mental space, your mental.
that for one, I was gonna
Yeah,
say that for one, but also because you're not almost listening to other people's voices when it comes to your podcasts, and you can
yeah,
just do it the way you and Kurt want to do. Does that help at
yes.
all?
I think it does, and also I have a small network of friends who text me that have become more of a sounding board and an honest sounding board, meaning I've met them through the ups and downs of the last several years, and they followed me on Saved by the Pod. We become friends, and they listen to a lot of shows. and I trust their opinions on things, and they'll tell me, Paul, this sucked. There's a guy by the name of Efren. Don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he does the game event. He was at Starcast. He hosted that show for Starcast. He's on the Premier Streaming Network. He's very talented. He was a musical theater major, but he's also one of those guys who will be very, very critical. And he'll say, "You ready?" And I'm like, "No, shut up. I don't want to hear it." But I say it tongue in cheek because I know he is going to point out how I opened, what I said, how I could have said things differently, and give me everything that's going to help make me better versus coming at it like, you suck. You're not Conrad. Like that does nothing for anybody. I'm looking to try to get better. So that has helped having those people that you can rely on. And then I also like the fact of having my own self-awareness where as I watch and listen to the show, no, when I get some DMs, whether it's on Instagram or wherever, and they're like, that was hilarious, that was great. And then I'm like, okay, note to self, more of that type of stuff,
Mm,
more of that banter, more of that. And so then you start to see as you do that, you get more and more responses from people saying that was a home run.
mm. That's very, very cool. So when you do get those responses of like, that was a home run, do you sort of feel like, yeah, I'm starting to succeed? Or are you one of those people that's like, someone like this, that's cool, but I'm going about my regular life?
I think to myself, you know what? If I felt that way and yet it can, and I'm hearing that it connected that same way with others, then I know I have something. That doesn't mean it's going to connect with everybody. No, but I know there is a segment of people that really enjoyed it, and to me, that's the segment of people in the audience that I want to grow because
Mm,
that means Kurt and I are enjoying what we're doing. We're going to find an audience that really enjoys what we're doing as well. And if there's an audience that doesn't, then they can go find another podcast. This planet is full of hundreds and thousands of millions of people, and
yeah.
we're going to find our right audience.
You talked about there one show we haven't talked about, and I feel like we should, see as he retweeted what I put up, was Mailbag with Mike Chioda. So how does that one come about? How do you guys develop chemistry and things like that?
That to me is the most home run show that people don't know about, but is fun because it's behind the paywall. So it's totally behind the ad-free show paywall. You have to be a $29 a month or higher subscriber. But again, he and I have been working together for 2 years. And I have to really credit Mike because that show is the show where let my proverbial hair down. I don't have any, but if I did, that's the one where we've let it go. And we just say whatever's on our minds. We talk about sports, wrestling, music, his stories on the road, the crazy ones with the ladies, everything. And we have developed a cult following where it's to the point now where almost every show on that network has to, hey, we need your questions. Hey, we need your questions. For that show, they've never had to post and say, we need your questions. We always have at least an hour and a half's worth of material of questions from the listeners to go at every 2 weeks. He is a great storyteller. He is hilarious. And here's the magic. He talks to me all the time. We become such close friends.
Mm,
So when we know each other, we can come on and we're really throwing jabs at each other. We're talking about stuff that we both like. We're engaging our listeners and we've gotten to know them. So we're throwing questions that they said and we've gotten to be able to bust on them a little bit. It's almost kind of like a Howard Sternish style
chop
wrestling
chop.
show. And it's off the rails, but man, we have a blast with it. I love Mike Chioda.
You brought up there it being behind the paywall and things like that, and being able to let your proverbial hair down. Do you think being behind the paywall helps you let it down
Yes,
in some
absolutely.
ways?
Absolutely. Because you don't see a lot of that. And if anything does make the dirt sheets, they only will print because they have all the dirt sheets, as they call them, or whatever, the news, wrestling news wires. They'll really only cover any kind of nugget that Mike says about the wrestling business. And they've really left it alone when it comes to anything controversial or fun or whatever. There's some of those fun stories that we talk about. So I
Mm,
think having that extra layer of paywall protection feels like we have a safe community, really lets us just let it rip.
mm. One thing I am curious to know, what's your prep like a podcaster? As a podcaster, when you're trying to record, how do you get yourself into that mindset of, okay, I'm going to record a podcast with Kurt on or Mike today?
Yeah, sure. No, it's really good. So for all the shows, I have some type of notes, right? So we have a whole team that works with us as far as show prep, research, and all that good stuff. Mike, I typically get all the questions, put it in a Word doc, send it over to him so he can pre-read and check it out. We record in StreamYard, and then he and I will talk before we record on anything we need to cover prior to that. But Mike's show is pretty easy because it's all based on fan questions. So we can just jump in, do our thing. I know my opener and exit. I send him the link. When it's done, the next day I download it from StreamYard. I work it. I do all the work in Premiere Pro as far as throw music at the beginning, and then I upload it to our YouTube channel, and that show's done. As far as for the Kurt and Arn shows, I'm usually for those shows we usually have someone that pulls Richard Land, who I'm sure you've all heard of. He helps
Mm.
pull the clips for us. Well, I will grab those clips and I'll run them through a video editor to make sure they're sized right for StreamYard. And then I'll go through all the notes and research and any ad spots that need to be recorded. I pre-record all ads for our shows and make sure they're all in a folder. And then it's just sending those guys the link and tell them what we're talking about. And then we'll jump on the show. Kurt gets his notes beforehand. He likes to pre-read all of his interviews.
Mm. How do you get yourself in that mindset though of I'm going to record a podcast today? Like, do you have to do any sort of mental exercises, things like that?
As far as getting in the mindset, it's just again me pre-reading the. No, not really, because my life, everything's is crazy. I have a full-time regular job that I go to, so
Oh,
my
really?
podcast, yeah, my podcast schedule is built around is usually on the weeknight evenings, where I'm rushing home from work. I jump out of the work clothes, jump into a t-shirt and hat, sit in the chair, pull up the notes that I worked on before, and then it's go time. There's no time to sit and think about anything.
Hmm. Something I'm very curious to know. I found this out the other day. I'm curious to know your thoughts. Kurt Angle has never had a five-star match.
I
So,
know.
according to Dave Meltzer, which you can say what you like, that's people's opinion. Which matches do you think Kurt should have got a 5 stars for?
Well, I think Kurt and Sean at WrestleMania should have been a 5-star match. I think Kurt, you can pick any of the one matches that he had with Chris Benoit. The match that he did with Brock Lesnar on SmackDown that was a that went 60 minutes. You know, that match was fantastic. So I think any of those matches, and there's some TNA matches that he could have easily had with Samoa Joe, AJ Styles. Listen, he's fought guys, and I think that Meltzer's rating has grading curve has changed over the years. That's all that tells me.
Hmm. Fair enough. So before we do a segment that I call generic questions, as we look at wrapping this up soon, because I do want to be respectful of your time, I want to put it out into the universe, Paul. What is on your bucket list when it comes to ad-free shows? Who do you want to work with and things like that?
That's a great question. I've been able to pretty much do a podcast with a lot of Conrad's folks at least once or twice, right? So Jim Ross, Bruce Pritchard, Eric Bischoff. Um, I don't know that there's one person that is currently in the network that I'd say, man, I'd love to do a podcast with this person. I feel like I've kind of been able to do show. I also do Rebels Happy Hour with Rebel, who was in
Yeah.
AEW. That's every other Sunday, and myself and Corey Ryan Forrester do that show with her. So I don't know that there's someone on my ultimate bucket list. The guy that's a current wrestler that I would ultimately love to do a podcast with one day would be Adam Cole.
Oh, what would you like to hear about from Adam
because
Cole
because
then?
anything and everything, and I'll tell you why. We had him on as a guest on the Kurt Angle show. He was on 5 or 10 minutes prior to Kurt, and his energy and how nice he was, and he and he's from Pennsylvania originally. I just had like instant chemistry with him, and I could tell that's a guy I would love to work with.
That's very, very cool. As we look at wrapping this up, Paul, as like I said, I do want to be respectful of your time. And we've been going nearly an hour, but also I don't want my internet to keep crapping out on me. And this is very starting to annoy me. I'm not going to lie. We are going to do a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before know this will ask my guests their favorite match, favorite overall pay per view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019, for example, favorite wrestler's entrance music, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, questions Paul might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, guys, I have answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
Okay, so man, that's hard. So the match that I remember as a kid that sticks out in my mind is, can I give you more than one or no?
Yeah, yeah.
WWF and Jim Crockett. WWF match at six because the sheer spectacle and how cool. Another WWE match I'll give you is Shawn Michaels Undertaker WrestleMania 25. That was
Ooh,
phenomenal. Shawn Michaels, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. So I'll throw that nugget at you. Uh, Jim Crockett is 1985 Starcade Magnum TA Tully Blanchard I Quit match in a steel cage.
ooh. Why do those two matches speak to you out of interest?
I mean, just because that was the peak of my childhood as far as memories that stand out, like holy shit moments. Hogan, Andre Pontiac Silverdome, that was, I saw it at my buddy's house on a massive screen TV, one of those old school big TV, and walking into his living room and realizing WrestleMania 3 spectacle and then seeing those two when it was dark with Joey Morella in the ring. That was the biggest moment I had ever seen on wrestling to that point in my life. So it sticks in my mind. Magnum TA and Tully, just bloody, scary. I quit in the microphone with a piece of wooden chair being jabbed in the head, just forever seared into my memory.
That's very, very cool. I think I've lost you again. What about your favorite overall pay-per-view card?
Oh man. Well, I'll go with I'm going old school again. I'll say WrestleMania 3. I'll also go Starcade 86, the year after the I Quit match. As far as modern pay-per-views, man, that's a favorite pay-per-view. Hmm. I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily think that I say I have a favorite modern. I'd have to think about that more. We can come back
That's
to that later.
Yeah, no problem. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance music?
We're gonna go with Edge, Alter Bridge entrance music.
Hmm. Why does that one
Metalingus.
speak to you out of interest?
I love well, I loved Edge and his rated R superstar. He's the man, and I'm a huge fan of Alter Bridge. I love a lot of their music. I've seen him in concert.
Ah, how did it feel then to
Yeah.
be being such an Edge fan to get Edge on the Kurt Angle show?
Oh, you talk about being starstruck and not able to show it. That between him and then also Sasha Banks on, you just have to act like, oh, hey, nice to see you. And like the whole time you're like, holy shit, they're on the show. They're on Zoom right now looking at me. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
pretty cool, dude.
That's very, very cool, my friend. What about your favorite tag team of all time?
Man, I would have to go with I was huge Arn and Tully guy, and now I'm really loving FTR.
Hmm. So
Yeah,
I can imagine why, because they're very similar. But for
that's
more
exactly
viewers'
right.
context, is there reasons why?
No, I just love their style of wrestling, the way they work together as tag team, and they're a throwback. FTR is a throwback to Arn and Tully. But I'm a huge Arn Anderson fan too, so I just love the way they tag team wrestle together. Moves are in sync, hot tagging in and out, and I love that Dax and Cash have a tremendous amount of respect for the tag team wrestling of the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
So you gave me two answers there, Paul, of a modern and a classic one. So what we do on this show when someone gives me two answers is we fantasy book this. Where's this match happening? Who's going over? What's the stipulation? Things like that. We have a DeLorean in this scenario.
Well, you got it. Well, Arn and Tully versus FTR. We got to do it in Greensboro. Okay.
Hmm.
Maybe let's do it Starcade 86 style in a cage match, just like
Oh,
when the Andersons took on the Rock and Roll Express in a cage match, Starkey 86. Instead of taking on Rock and Roll, they'll take on FTR in a cage match. Lights will all be down, just spotlights on the cage itself. And we're gonna have referee Tommy Young will be the referee for the match, and it's for the NWA Tag Team Championships. So that's what we're gonna do.
who goes over?
I got to give it to FDR.
Hmm. That's very, very cool, my friend. And then finally, the final generic question, and I believe the biggest one, my friend. Who is your favorite overall wrestler?
Well, for a very long, long time. So I'm just going to stick with it. It's Shawn Michaels.
Hmm. What, just for more content, why does Shawn Michaels speak to you as a fan?
I love. I know his first one was great, but his second run after he came back from the back injury, I got back into wrestling, as I mentioned, in that early 2000s after that 2000 gap. And just the matches that he put on, the program with Chris Jericho, the program with The Undertaker, retiring Ric Flair. The guy was just incredible in that run. He didn't always have to win matches, but he was just amazing to work with in the ring, and I've just never seen anybody perform like he did. And then eventually AJ Styles. I always wanted that dream match, AJ
Hmm.
Styles, Shawn Michaels.
So you brought up one in that dream match. We're gonna do it again. Where's this match happening, and who's going over?
Oh, well, it's got to happen at WrestleMania, and so it's got to be in a stadium. And Shawn Michaels, to me, has to beat AJ at WrestleMania to be the Mr. Russell. He's Mr. WrestleMania. He has to
Yeah,
win.
yeah, fair enough. So as we look at wrapping this up, Paul, obviously I want to say thank you for a great conversation. I want to apologize about my voice and the internet. But the question I end all my interviews on is I believe as podcasters and content creators, we're all sort of gonna live forever in some sort of very strange way. So what is one piece of content you're like, I would like to be remembered for that? And then what is one that you're like, yuck, please get rid of that?
Sure. Content wise, I think, and this is going to sound really strange, but Saved by the Pod, that podcast is still out there. If you never checked it out, especially after the first 5 or so episodes, it was brutal. But just go back and listen to that because for me, that's where it all started. And I was just having fun and cutting my teeth, and I was covering some stuff that I really enjoyed. So, Saved by the Pod would be the content that I'm most proud of. And the stuff that I would say get rid of, and I hope you never listen to, there was a show that I did called Jay-Z Flair Show, and you can't even find it anymore. We pulled it
Why did you pull
and
it
it was
out of
awful. And
interest?
so I'll just, well, the guy that did it, he had to change a heart on some stuff that he shared on the show. So he asked me to pull it all down. So when we stopped the show, I yanked it all. So it was his call.
Ah, fair dues. Obviously, as we wrap this up, Paul, I want to say thank you for a great conversation. Once again, I want to apologize about my voice and the terrible internet. But I know you said you don't promote yourself very much, but promote yourself, my friend. Where can the good people find
All right.
you,
Well,
your work, etc.?
yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, listen, thank you. You were a gracious host. I really appreciate you having me on. You were fantastic, and I hope your podcast continues to do well. You can find me at Pauly, Pauly B Well, on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, and also on Instagram. And then follow us and check us out on the Kurt Angle Show and the Orange Show. And then check us out on adfreeshows.com. You can check it out, get the first week absolutely free, and then it's just $9 a month after the first week, and you can check out all the content. They have various tier levels that you can sign up for. You got to get to that $29 tier level to then check out the Monday mailbag with Mike Chioda, which I'm going to tell you is worth the price of admission alone. He and I bring it every other week. We're doing a fun survivor pool right now for the NFL
Ooh.
season for football. Winner, we have first, second, third place winners. We have a healthy pot for that. So we do that every year. Our community loves us. So check us out, ad free shows, Kurt Angle Show, Orange Show. And man, like I said, I really appreciate you having me on.
It's the pleasure was all mine, my friend. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Trash on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.